Delighted to say from Japan, Ronan O'Gara joins us on the line. Morning to you, Ronan.
Hey lads, how are you?
We're all, as a nation, I think, trying to get our head around this entire thing. Our first chance to have a chat with you, obviously, after what happened last week. And, like, as a nation, struggling to get our heads around the, like, undoubted and inarguable success that Josh Smith has had over the last number of years and what's happened over the last, I suppose, 12 months, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a good way of putting it. We are all struggling, I think, looking for answers because there was such a non-performance at the weekend that, it's completely the opposite you expected of a Joe Smith team, and on the biggest stage of all, the quarter-final of a World Cup, which is essentially the biggest tournament for 4 years. And it just didn't look like Ireland at all.
Yeah. You made the point yourself in the paper this morning, the Examiner this morning, that there's no point in picking through that game in too much depth, so we won't do that. But over 12 months ago, but we won a Grand Slam not that long ago. Was it a case that teams started to figure us out, or was it a case that teams were actually themselves really just working up to a World Cup in a way that it seems now that we weren't?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's most definitely the case. I think we are better. Probably in between World Cups, but that shouldn't necessarily be the case. I think, I think after 11 there was a lot of, I suppose, question marks asked, and rightly so, because it was a great opportunity to get to a semi-final against Wales, and after the highs of beating Australia, I don't think our mental capacity was good enough to be able to put in two big performances in a row when it mattered most. And you even go back as far as 2003 with a last-minute opportunity to beat Australia, which could have meant Scotland in the quarter-final of a Rugby World Cup. And now this thing has grown into a monster and not been able to get beyond the quarter-final stage. But it just, I think our mental approach is the complete opposite to New Zealand. They absolutely thrive when the pressure comes on, and we as a nation don't.
Like, I know it's a very small thing, but the two performances in a row thing, Ronan, is very interesting because we can blame injuries and all of that for what happened in 2015 as well, but there's also probably an element of not being able to put in two performances in a row as well after beating the French.
100% correct, yes. Like, I think that was, and I'm not having a go and saying it was convenient in 2015. It was still a deficit of 20-odd points we were beaten by Argentina by. So, yes, I suppose we emptied the tank against France, but then 7 days later we're nowhere near at the pitch to confront a rampant Argentinian team. But between 2015 and 2019, you would have thought that there was big scope there in that regard to get better. But, I don't think you're unlucky in two World Cups. We have to take harsh lessons and messages out of this World Cup if a lot of us that genuinely care about Irish rugby want them to succeed going forward, because it's only when you leave maybe Ireland and you see it from a different angle. But the World Cups, it has become a non-performing environment for us, and that needs to change. But there's a great saying that if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. So unless we take on board this and you're serious for change, nothing will change, because we'll go hell for leather now for the next 3 years, but you're peaking another 12 months too early, because I would like to think for sports people that the World Cup is the stage to be measured on going forward. And in the past, maybe we didn't do that for whatever reason, but I think now it's blatantly obvious to what other nations are measuring themselves from.
Yeah, like even listening to what Joe Smith had to say, like the closest thing that I could come to some sort of rationale about it afterwards was listening to him talk about that maybe we'd been too focused on a quarter-final, which in itself almost is like defeatist almost to a degree, right? Like, because you're not setting yourself up to play back-to-back monster games. You're just happy to win a quarter-final, which, I mean, I know it's all hindsight, and we're analysing, picking to death the comments afterwards, but like, we're so focused on a quarter-final that we weren't talking about winning the World Cup. We just wanted to win a quarter-final here.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, that was probably the internal talk. I think those players would have been, and is the right story. But I think for me, once you saw the Twickenham, even though I didn't even think I watched that game live, but a result like that, irrespective away from home in Twickenham, it just makes you sit up and take notice from going, because whatever team played that day, it was still the squad of players that were going to a World Cup. And if you're taking, nearly 50 points in a World Cup warm-up, I think I tried to make the point that it isn't a fitness issue. I don't think there's something with the rugby, or something with the mindset that isn't right going into it. So, we were hoping that it would get fixed in the day or at the competition, but it actually got worse as we progressed.
Yeah, like, obviously, interesting to get your thoughts, given where you're coaching at the minute. Like, if you look at France and their record, right, they've won the Six Nations once in the last 12 years. We've won it 4 times in that period, yet France have been to 2 Rugby World Cup semi-finals, 07 and 11, and obviously made it to that final and maybe should have won it. And if they hadn't lost the head last weekend, that would have been 3. Like, they disappear, essentially, for 4 years and turn up at a World Cup. And our methodology seems to be the exact reverse of that.
Yeah, well, I don't think the French model is the one to follow, but I get your point. As you say, from a moment of ill discipline, France should be playing South Africa this weekend. They were the better rugby team on the day, and Gatlin said as much. But I think what is very interesting in the fact of that is, at least France played. This is a team that was probably an Irish team that was ranked number 1 in the world, but on the biggest stage of all, it didn't fire a shot at the knockout stages. And I genuinely believe that we are good at. Some people are saying that we're good in a league system and on a league basis, but I think we have the mindset for cup rugby, and maybe a lot of people are forgetting that point. But I think. I think France, at least, they gave it a go and they had a crack. From an Irish viewpoint, or from a player's point of view, they must be so frustrated.
You kind of hinted at it there a little bit earlier on, but just that sacrificing success almost in the short term, and the Six Nations is a huge revenue driver for that, for Irish rugby in general. So I don't know that would...
question, all these topics have to be put on the table, and then at least I think you know where you're playing. Where the goalposts are, and you're looking to see, is it realistic, or is the World Cup, is it not of number 1 interest? But I would think anyone with a sporting ambition, that's where, the thought of winning a Rugby World Cup is the greatest driver of all time for anyone involved in Irish rugby, or Irish sport for that matter, I would think, because that's something that motivates. And I think that's why, we're still a week out, but it's still a massive disappointment. That feeling deep inside you with that performance at the weekend, it just, I think it's hard to accept that.
So as a model then, right, if you were to forget the revenue impact and forget all of that stuff and just say, right, let's put a plan together that we think is going to put us in the best position in 4 years' time, is that to experiment over the next 2 Six Nations?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I think you've got to be. If your World Cup is the final piece of the jigsaw, you work back from there, and there are various stages at that. Obviously, 4 years is 48 months is a long time away, and the turnover of players will be big. But I think what has come out of this World Cup and the previous World Cup is that from a planning or periodization point of view, you look at the minutes, I think, some of our players had going into it, but then that, my argument is blown out of the water. You look at England and you look at Wales, and they seem to be up to speed. So what's different with us? Yeah. And I think maybe from a rugby point of view, I think it had got to a stage where when real pressure came, and real pressure doesn't appear that often, it appears maybe once in 4 years at a World Cup, but the instinctive capacity of players on their inside, that stimulus wasn't able to be achieved. We couldn't get rugby out of people that were able to express themselves. Is that because we become so dependent on creating rucks, and a lot of the rugby is taken out of players?
What do you think?
But you can be sure that, to be fair, isn't how Joe Schmidt coaches either. Like, from my week spent in him, he creates a framework where it gives license for players to make decisions, but maybe when you're in the environment so long, you you take his option more so than maybe having a look at what other options are there.
Yeah, like, because there was Brian O'Driscoll on this show, and he's in the Sewa afterwards, and Sky was talking about the brief influence that Stuart Lancaster would have had when he came into the Irish setup, and that he's obviously the unstructured chaos is his big thing, and Joe's is probably somewhat different to that, and that maybe Joe and maybe some of the players were looking at that and going, there's another way of doing this, and that maybe unsettled the ship slightly.
Yeah, what I would look upon it differently. I would look upon it, that's another strength. Because like that, if you have really good strike plays, but if you're really good in unstructured play, that surely makes your game stronger, is how I would have seen it. But I think a lot of it too comes down to the players, Adrian. They have to take responsibility for their performance on the pitch. I think what I think immediately needs to be addressed is at what stage do you get fluency in your performance? Do you get rhythm in your performance? Because from this World Cup, you could see with the Robbie Henshaw example of the ball sitting up for him and he couldn't actually place it down to score, unfortunately. You could see that autopilot or that capacity just to play in a free-flow state wasn't there within the players.
Do you need a fluency between what's going on in the provinces and the Irish team, or is that, because obviously people point at the Leinster example, or is that just too simple a solution, or something that doesn't quite work?
Well, there is a big step up, obviously, from club rugby to test rugby, but I think you'd like to see probably a little bit more value coming back into the Munster-Leinster games and full teams being played and players going at each other. I think Team Ireland was so prioritised for the last 4 years that it was such a settled team too. I think you look at all the other nations, that kind of unpredictability about who would start. I think that you just have to have that at top level sport. And I think there will be, I would say, big changes for Six Nations. Big changes, because a lot of these players have been given their opportunity, but you have to say in the last 12 months that they haven't probably reached the levels they'd like to, so I would think change will be on the way.
Would you do that straight away, would you?
No, I don't think so. I think it's actually every position or name warrants a serious discussion, and the fact that for example, you look at the number 10 position, Johnny is 34 now. It's he won't be at the next World Cup, so it depends what the short-term goal of the IRFU is, and what's the medium-term goal, and what is the long-term goal. But that will become very obvious within I would say this Six Nations, or after the Six Nations.
And is the right course of action to go for the long-term goal to install your Joey Carberry for next year's Six Nations, do you reckon?
I don't know, is the right or wrong. The language I would use on, I think what's really important is that if your World Cup is your focus, I think Stuart Lancaster actually gave a great presentation on the number of caps needed and the youth and experience, but I felt we had too many old legs in the team for this World Cup. I think it's really important you've experience, but sprinkled with experience, you need massive youth, and you need that enthusiasm and exuberance and that fearless performance. But I think at this stage in this cycle for the Irish players, I think it became too predictable. It became very obvious who was carrying, where he was carrying, and that capacity to play the ball out of the tackle was something that we lacked greatly.
Just on that point that you make about getting back to basics in terms of provincial rivalry and actually just allowing Munster and Leinster to tear strips out of each other every so often, would you take that step? Would you take that one step further and potentially allow a bit more freedom in terms of movement of players? Like, should Andy Farrell be considering calling Simon Zebo up even if he stays at Racing?
I think the great thing from this World Cup is that everything is back on the table now. The old model hasn't worked at all. We're further away now, I feel, than we ever were, but like, there are usually in competitions there's a lot of positives. I think if you're calling this one honestly or accurately, what are the positives for Irish rugby after this World Cup? It's very hard to come up with a list, isn't it? And that's not the
that there were no
having a go.
That there were no injuries. Somebody said to me flippantly after last weekend.
The reason you don't need any injuries is because you're going deep into a competition. But we had a full deck to play from.
Exactly. Yeah.
We had everything we worked for, but then, you know, and you know, obviously I'm an ex-player, and I know exactly how these boys are feeling because I was exactly this in 2007. That's the most horrible thing that can you experience in your career. But the big difference between 07 and 19 is that it's 12 years later, and you'd like to think lessons are, but I think I think everything needs to be put on the table because, as I said, if you always do what you always did, you're always going to get what you always got. So it isn't working. We need to change. We need to have a look, and you need to ask hard questions because to you know what I mean, the catchphrase, the Crusaders, what's best for the team? You get better or you get beaten, and we haven't got better.
One last one just before we get on to get your predictions for the games this weekend. One of the solutions that people are reaching, obviously, for what could we have done differently here, one of the solutions that I thought was an interesting one was by Gordon Darcy during the week, talking about the Carberry move to Munster being the wrong one, that they should have been more imaginative. They should have looked at this dual playmaker role. Yes, it would have been at the expense of one of the older stagers, maybe Rob Kearney, if he'd have gone to 15. Is that something you think in hindsight might have worked?
No, I think Carberry's a 10. I think he's a great 10. I think we'll see that in the years that will come. You know, I think the argument then is that I mean, if Johnny went down in the first week of the Rugby World Cup, who'd play 10?
Ross Byrne?
We didn't have backup experience really to him. I think Ross Byrne has a big future ahead of him, a really big future, but he's more a game manager. And he needs to be playing that position, and he's getting that with Leinster, but there's still a long way to go in his development to be a test out half. But I think, you know, I mean, the Johnny Carberry, both of them on the team, yes, I think it is a good idea, but maybe after 50 minutes. You know, I think people underappreciate the importance of 15 and the position-specific criteria involved in playing that position. There's a lot more to it than just hanging out the back, you know?
Yeah. All right, well, look at here. There's plenty more to discuss on that, I'm sure, over the next few months. Anyway, the England-New Zealand game tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. 7-point spread, it seems, here in New Zealand's favour. This is going to be an absolute rip-roarer. Which way are you calling it?
I think New Zealand. I think their capacity to perform when the moment requires is superior to the other nations. I feel that I met a few of their players during the week, and I think they're humming. I think they're up for it. I think they realise how much of a threat England will be, far greater threat than Ireland were. They got a little bit of a taste in the Northern Hemisphere at the weekend, but I think England will be obviously much stronger at set piece, and their defence will be stronger, so it makes for a great game. But I just think I was surprised they brought Ford back in. Genuinely was. I thought that was the team for a World Cup potential winning team that England picked against Australia. So but you're beginning to see snippets of Mwanga. I think he has another gear or two in him, which is scary. And the typhoon is live here at the minute, a very mild one compared to the previous one. It's a desperate day, but the forecast is for it to pass on a dry day and dry conditions, and I don't even think a wet ball would interfere with New Zealand's capacity to handle it. So at the minute they seem hot to me, too hot to handle.
Yeah, and I mean, we already spoke about maybe Wales have no right even to be this far along. Is that a clear South Africa call for you, or is there a game in that?
No, it isn't, because of how poorly Wales were at the weekend. And in fairness to Wales, they don't back up poor performances. So I think they, in a strange way, semi-final, the handbrake is off. I think they'll go for it more than you'd expect them, and they will be dangerous. South Africa, obviously, Colby is just such a dangerous weapon in the wide channels. He would be a big loss, but I think it'll be closer than people expect, I think.
Yeah, all right, we're looking for it.
I think South Africa will win, but I would say it'll go down to the death.
Yeah, I think for all our sanity, New Zealand and South Africa wins will be exactly what's required this weekend. Enjoy the games. Thanks a million.
Yeah, cheers, lads. Good to chat.
Thanks a
Chat.
million.
Thank you.
Ronan O'Gara on the line there from Japan.